Question that comes up a lot of times in our Kihila, a lot of Sfaradim are still not first generation Americans or people that speak, let's say, Lashon HaKodesh in this country as a natural first language. People speak other languages, don't necessarily understand Lashon HaKodesh. And the question is, what is the ideal for them to do when it comes to tefillah, when it comes to other parts of holidays and Shabbat? Should a person say the Kiddush, the Hallel, tefillah in a language which they understand better? It's also going to be more meaningful when you pray in a language which you understand. Or do we say it has to always be in Lashon HaKodesh? Do we say that the tefillah and any ritual that we do has to be in Lashon HaKodesh? So by halachot of Kriyat Shema, Maran writes that Kriyat Shema itself, even though it's mitzvah doraita, Kriyat Shema may be recited in any language that a person understands. Mikar Adin, the Kriyat Shema, the Tefillah, the Hallel, Kiddush, Brachot, all of these are allowed to be said in any language which a person understands. However, it's mitzvah min hamuchal. It's the ideal that a person should try to say as much as he can in Lashon HaKodesh. When it comes to Kriyat Shema, for example, there are certain words which we're not familiar with how to translate. Right? Translate the word it. Translate the word totafot. So you look in English Sidurim, they have come up with certain translations, but it's not 100% clear how to translate these. And therefore, if you have mitzvah to recite the Kriyat Shema and you miss, you're reciting in a different language and the translation is not accurate, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. Besides that, even there are words that we know how to translate, but there's different midrashim, what it's supposed to mean. Mishnah Berurah brings the case of Veshinantam Levanecha. What does Veshinanta mean? Does it mean a person is supposed to study, or a person is supposed to review, or a person is supposed to make the halachot sharp on their tongue? All different midrashim. So because of the fact that it's not 100% clear how to translate, the best thing for Kriyat Shema, as far as technically fulfilling the mitzvah, the best thing is to say it in Lashon HaKodesh, even if a person doesn't understand. If a person wants to say it in a different language, again, that is the halakha. But still, nonetheless, a person should recite in Lashon HaKodesh because that's mitzvah min hamuchal. That's Kriyat Shema. What about tefillah? Tefillah also is a lengthy tefillah, Shmona Esrei, other mizmorim that we say. Maran also says that tefillah may be recited, including the Shmona Esrei, can be recited in any language. However, once again, the best way to recite the tefillah is in Lashon HaKodesh. You may recite in any language, but the best is in Lashon HaKodesh. Why is that the best thing? Mishnah Berurah brings down in the Biur Halacha. First of all, the actual letters, the actual otiyot of the Aleph Bet themselves have great kedusha and great koach and great power. When a person recites the tefillah, even if he doesn't understand it, the words themselves, which are formulated based on the Aleph Bet, have a certain power. Plus, the tefillah that we have, Shmona Esrei, the text is not midoraita, it comes from the composition of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. The Biur Halacha writes, Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, these sages, 120, the body of 120, the supreme chachamim of the nation, when they composed the tefillot, they infused and they implanted many, many deep sodot, many, many deep secrets, many powers, many, many tzirufim, tikkunim, different sodot, everything into the tefillah. And even if those powers are there all the time, even if you don't understand what you're saying, so if a person recites the tefillah with the exact formula of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, then you're tapping into that power. It makes the tefillah more powerful, more effective before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's the language that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used, Hebrew's language that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used to create the world. Mishnah Berurah writes, he speaks to the Nevi'im in that language. There's power in the way that Anshe Knesset HaGdolah infused the words. Therefore, the best thing is to recite the tefillah in Lashon HaKodesh. At the end of the day, it's very hard for a person to go his whole life reciting tefillah he doesn't understand. So therefore, many people are interested in praying also in the language they do understand. As you mentioned, for the Kriyat Shema, best is Hebrew, to avoid the tricky words when it comes to translation. But for the rest of tefillah, people like to understand what they're saying, rightfully so, and they want to recite the tefillah in a different language. So we said, Mikar Adin, Maran writes explicitly, it's allowed. You're allowed to recite the tefillah in a language which you understand. To recite the tefillah in a language you don't understand, which would be kind of silly, but it wouldn't work either mitzad halacha. A person may only use this allowance of Maran to recite the tefillah in a different language, provided that you understand the language. You understand doesn't count. Now, even once you understand the language, there are still some rules. And over here, if we follow the usual rule, many times in Shulchan Aruch, Maran brings down a list of opinions. One opinion that he brings, Yesh Omrim, some say differently, V'yesh Omrim, sometimes he brings the third opinion. So if we use the usual rule, Chacham Ovadia Yosef, based on other Achronim, Pri Megadim, others, that you have a certain rule. Whenever Maran brings multiple opinions, how do you know who to follow? So it depends a lot of times on the language that Maran used when he brings the opinion. If he brings one opinion anonymously, it doesn't say who it is, or it doesn't say that there are some say, like this, he just brings the first opinion as the anonymous halacha. That means, according to our tradition, that's how Maran rules. That's why he presented it this way. This is the universal halacha. It's called a stam. He just said it like this, that's halacha. Afterwards, he brings the Yesh Omrim. That means that he wanted you to be aware of that opinion. He wanted to give a little bit of respect to the fact there's another opinion out there. But the primary halacha follows the first opinion. So we have a new halacha. Maran writes in Siman Kuf Aleph, Sif Dalet. Maran writes that if a person wants to pray in different languages, there are some rules. The first rule that Maran says is that he's only allowed to pray in a different language if he's with the tzibur, if he's in the Bet Knesset with a minyan of people praying. In that case, we allow him to pray in a different language, but if he's praying b'yachid, he's praying by himself, he's praying at home, he doesn't have a minyan, then he must pray in Hebrew. Okay? So according to Maran, you're only allowed to use a different language, you understand, if you're praying with a tzibur. What's the understanding behind that distinction? Why would it matter whether you're in the minyan or not a minyan? And the answer is that this gets involved in other questions that I guess we could really explore, but the basic idea is when a person is with a tzibur, our tefillot go straight to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't need any intermediary. In general, we anyway don't need an intermediary, but there's nothing else. It's a straight pipeline to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when you're with a tzibur. So, given that that's the case, you could pray in whatever language you want. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right there, he takes the tefillah. But when a person prays b'yachid, he prays by himself, so then he depends on the malachim. That's what Mishnah Berurah brings down. He depends on the malachim to transport his tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Gemara says, a wild thing, Gemara says, Malachim do not understand languages other than Hebrew. They don't understand anything but Lashon HaKodesh. So here a person prays, he's praying b'yachid, he's praying by himself without a minyan, and he says a personal tefillah in a different language. The Malachim which are needed to transport his tefillah can't do it because they don't understand it. That's a difficult concept. Tosfot, Masechet Shabbat, ask on this. What do you mean Malachim don't understand other languages? Tosfot's language is, they understand what we're even thinking in our hearts. They only understand that our thoughts, if we're thinking in Hebrew. Tosfot assume that Malachim understand all languages. So it's a difficult concept, but it's accepted l'halacham. The Malachim only understand the Lashon HaKodesh, and therefore if you pray at home, where you need the Malachim to transport your tefillah, and they don't understand your tefillah, so they can't transport it. This is the halacha that Maran writes, and it's brought down in the halacha Berurah, Chacham David Yosef, that Mikar Adin, this is the halacha, that a person should only pray in a different language if they're praying with a congregation, you're praying with the minyan. But there are other opinions. The other opinions say you may even pray in a different language at home. Even if you're by yourself, you're allowed to pray in a different language as long as the tefillah that you're praying is part of the usual sidur, part of the usual order of tefillot that everybody says in the Bet Knesset. Because the idea is all those tefillot were meant, that when they were written, for everybody. They were meant for the whole community, so they have the power of being part of the communal tefillot. So even if you happen to say them at home, you're still part of the tzibur, and again, you don't need the malachim anymore. Interesting, if a person, God forbid, has the occasion to visit somebody who's ill, so we want to pray for that person. Part of the mitzvah of being mevakir cholim is that you pray for the person. You understand, you see the person firsthand, you see what they're going through, and you're inspired to offer a sincere tefillah for that person. So if a person prays for the ill person, for the person you're visiting, you're allowed to pray in any language. Even though you're by yourself, you're not with the minyan, you can still pray, even according to man, you can still pray in any language. What's the idea? Because the Gemara says HaKadosh Baruch Hu is close to the head of somebody who's ill. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is hovering. Again, whatever these concepts mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Lo Kol Ha'aretz Kvodo, he's everywhere. But in some way, in some bechina, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is more intense. I don't know. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nimtza. He is found al rosh the choleh. a person who's ill. So since HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right there by the ill person, once again, I don't need the malachim to transform my tefillah, and therefore in any language it's acceptable. So if a person would have the occasion to visit somebody who's ill, he's allowed to pray in any language. Another thing that we say based on the second opinion, regardless of what the second opinion was, we said it out, but we're not going to go over it, is nashim. Typically, nashim, also, halacha is that nashim are obligated to pray in tefillah also. But for many thousands of years, nashim would typically pray in a language other than Lashon HaKodesh. Halacha we see, not always did the nashim have the background, the education to speak Lashon HaKodesh. And they were allowed to pray in a different language. Why is that? The reason why they were allowed to pray in different languages, again, because we say, based on the third opinion in Shulchan Aruch, then a person is allowed to pray in any language by themselves, even as long as it's not Aramaic. Because the third opinion holds that Malachim, they do understand all the languages, but they don't take a tefillah of Aramaic to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For some reason, Aramit, the language of Aramaic, is miguneh. It's somewhat despised, it's looked down upon by the Malachim. But any other language would be acceptable, according to their opinion. And that's why, throughout the generations, women would oftentimes pray in a different language, even biachid, because they don't have to come to the tefillah b'tzibur. So they would pray even biachid in their own language. Why? Why would they pray in their own language? Why is it acceptable? Because as long as it's not Aramit, as long as it's not Aramaic, it goes straight to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.